The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gates as Royal Guard Marcus Chen adjusted his bulletproof vest for what he thought would be another routine day. In his 8 years protecting the royal family, he had seen countless vehicles approach the secured perimeter. Diplomats in black sedans, delivery trucks with fresh flowers, even lost tourists who took a wrong turn. But nothing could have prepared him for what would unfold when a battered white van rolled up to Checkpoint Alpha at exactly 9:47 a.m. The van looked ordinary enough. Paint peeling at the edges, a small dent on the passenger door, windows tinted just dark enough to obscure the occupants inside. The driver appeared calm, documents ready, following standard protocol. Everything seemed normal until Marcus stepped closer to perform the mandatory vehicle inspection. What he discovered in that van would not only change his life forever, but would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. The contents were so shocking that within minutes, Marcus found himself reaching for his rifle, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of a decision that would determine whether a nation's most guarded secrets would see the light of day. This is the true story of how one routine security check became the catalyst for the biggest political scandal in decades, and how a single royal guard found himself at the center of a web of deception that threatened everything he had sworn to protect. Marcus Chen had always believed in routine. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., his alarm would pierce through the silence of his small apartment overlooking the Thames. By 6 a.m., he was already in his kitchen, brewing the same blend of Earl Grey tea his grandfather had shipped from Hong Kong decades ago. The ritual never changed. 2 sugars, a splash of milk, and exactly 3 minutes of steeping time while he reviewed the daily security briefings on his encrypted tablet. The briefings were usually mundane. Weather conditions that might affect outdoor ceremonies, diplomatic visits requiring extra protocol, maintenance schedules for the palace security systems. Marcus read them with the same methodical attention he applied to everything in his life. His colleagues often joked that he treated grocery lists with the same seriousness as national security documents, but Marcus had learned early in his career that details mattered. In his line of work, overlooking something small could mean the difference between life and death. By 7:15 a.m., Marcus was dressed in his crisp navy uniform, the fabric pressed to military precision. The royal crest on his shoulder caught the morning light as he checked his equipment one final time. Radio communications device properly charged and tested. Service weapon cleaned and secured in its holster. Emergency medical kit fully stocked and accessible. Flashlight, backup batteries, handcuffs, and the specialized detection equipment that had become standard issue after the terrorist attempts 3 years prior. The drive to Buckingham Palace took exactly 22 minutes through London's awakening streets. Marcus had timed it hundreds of times, accounting for traffic patterns, construction delays, and the occasional protest that might block his usual route. He preferred to arrive 15 minutes early, using the extra time to walk the perimeter and familiarize himself with any overnight changes to the security setup. Palace security operated like a well-oiled machine, with multiple layers of protection surrounding the royal family. The outermost ring consisted of traditional police officers who managed crowd control and basic inquiries from tourists. The second layer involved specialized palace guards who monitored the grounds and handled routine security matters. Marcus belonged to the elite third ring, the personal protection unit, responsible for the most sensitive areas and high-risk situations. His assignment that Tuesday morning was Checkpoint Alpha, the main vehicle entrance used by authorized personnel and pre-screened visitors. It was considered a moderate-risk position, requiring constant vigilance, but typically involving predictable interactions. Diplomats arriving for meetings, staff members returning from errands, delivery vehicles bringing everything from fresh flowers to specialized equipment for upcoming events. The checkpoint itself was an impressive display of modern security technology disguised as traditional architecture. The stone gatehouse looked like it had stood for centuries, but hidden beneath its classical facade were reinforced steel barriers capable of stopping an armored vehicle, X-ray machines that could detect weapons or explosives, and cameras with facial recognition software connected to international security databases. Marcus's partner that morning was Sarah Williams, a sharp-eyed veteran with 12 years of palace security experience. Sarah had an uncanny ability to spot trouble before it fully materialized, whether it was a nervous diplomat carrying falsified documents or a delivery driver whose story didn't quite match the paperwork. She could read people the way Marcus read security briefings with complete attention and an eye for inconsistencies that others might miss. They began their shift with the standard equipment check and briefing review. The day ahead looked relatively quiet according to the schedule. A small luncheon for visiting education ministers, a rehearsal for next week's charity gala, and routine maintenance on the East Wing heating system. No high-profile visitors were expected, No public ceremonies planned, and the threat level remained at its baseline yellow status. The first few hours passed without incident. A parade of familiar faces presented their credentials and passed through the checkpoint. Margaret from the flower department arrived with arrangements for the state dining room. James, the head chef's assistant, returned from the specialty spice market with ingredients for the evening meal. Dr. Patterson, the royal family's personal physician, checked in for his weekly visit to update medical records and conduct routine health consultations. Each interaction followed the same careful protocol. Documents examined, identities verified against the authorized personal database, vehicles inspected for unauthorized items or modifications. Marcus had performed these procedures thousands of times, but he never allowed familiarity to breed carelessness. Every person was treated with the same thorough attention, regardless of how well he knew them or how many times they had passed through the checkpoint. Around mid-morning, the routine was interrupted by an unusual radio transmission. Palace intelligence had received a vague tip about potential suspicious activity in the area, though the source was considered unreliable and the information lacked specifics. The message simply advised all security personnel to maintain heightened awareness and report anything unusual, however minor it might seem. Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest that always accompanied such announcements. 8 years of security work had taught him that real threats rarely announced themselves with dramatic flourishes. Instead, they often hid behind mundane appearances, disguised as routine interactions that only revealed their true nature upon closer examination. He increased his attention to detail, spending extra time reviewing documents and asking follow-up questions that might reveal inconsistencies. Sarah noticed the change in his demeanor and adjusted her own approach accordingly. They had worked together long enough to communicate through subtle gestures and shared glances, each understanding what the other was thinking without needing to verbalize their concerns. The morning continued with its mix of routine interactions and careful vigilance. A group of maintenance workers arrived to service the heating system, their identities verified against pre-approved contractor lists. A delivery truck brought fresh linens for the guest quarters, the driver presenting the same credentials he had shown twice monthly for the past 3 years. A black sedan deposited a minor diplomat for the education luncheon, his documentation properly stamped and sealed by the appropriate government officers. Each encounter was processed with the same methodical care. But Marcus found himself paying closer attention to details that normally would have passed without comment. The way people held their paperwork, the direction of their gaze while answering questions, the subtle signs of nervousness that might indicate deception or hidden motives. It was during this heightened state of awareness that the white van first appeared on the security monitors. The vehicle approached slowly, following the designated route for service entrances. Nothing about its initial approach seemed unusual. It was traveling at an appropriate speed, maintaining proper distance from other vehicles, and showing no signs of erratic behavior that might indicate a problem. Marcus watched the van progress through the outer security perimeters, noting that it passed the preliminary checkpoints without incident. The guards at those stations would have conducted basic visual inspections and verified that the vehicle was expected, but the more thorough examination would happen when it reached his position at Checkpoint Alpha. As the van drew closer, Marcus could see more details. The vehicle appeared to be several years old, with minor cosmetic damage consistent with regular commercial use. The license plate was clearly visible and properly positioned. The driver seemed to be following instructions from previous visits, suggesting familiarity with palace security procedures. Sarah positioned herself at her usual station, ready to handle the documentation, while Marcus prepared to conduct the vehicle inspection. They had developed an efficient system over months of working together. She would engage the occupants in conversation while reviewing their paperwork, and he would examine the vehicle for anything that might pose a security risk. The van pulled up to the checkpoint window at exactly 9:47 a.m. Marcus noted the time automatically, a habit developed from years of maintaining detailed security logs. The driver rolled down the window and began reaching for the required documents, displaying the calm confidence of someone who had been through this process many times before. Nothing about the initial interaction raised any red flags. The driver was polite and prepared. The paperwork appeared to be in order, and the van itself looked like hundreds of others that passed through the checkpoint each month. But as Marcus approached the vehicle to begin his inspection, he felt an inexplicable sense of unease that he couldn't quite identify. Years of training had taught him to trust his instincts, even when logic suggested that everything was normal. Sometimes the human brain detected patterns or inconsistencies that weren't immediately apparent to conscious thought. Marcus had learned to pay attention to these subtle warnings, understanding that they often provided the first indication of potential problems. He began his inspection with a standard external examination, looking for signs of modification, hidden compartments, or anything else that might pose a security threat. The van's exterior appeared normal, but as he moved toward the rear doors, he noticed something that made him pause. The rear of the vehicle sat slightly lower than would be expected for a van of this size and type. It was a subtle difference that might have been explained by a heavy load, but something about the way the van rested on its suspension suggested that the weight distribution wasn't quite what it should be. Marcus had examined thousands of vehicles over his career, and he had developed an eye for details that others might miss. He signaled to Sarah that he was going to conduct a more thorough inspection than usual. She acknowledged with a slight nod while continuing her conversation with the driver, asking routine questions about the purpose of the visit and the contents of the vehicle. Her tone remained friendly and professional, giving no indication that anything was amiss. Marcus moved to the rear of the van and examined the door handles and locks more carefully. Everything appeared normal from the outside, but his sense of unease continued to grow. There was something about this vehicle that didn't feel right, though he couldn't yet identify what was triggering his suspicions. The moment that would change everything was still moments away. But Marcus Chen, dedicated royal guard and protector of the crown, was already beginning to sense that this routine morning inspection was about to become something much more significant than anyone could have imagined. The driver's name was listed as Thomas Mitchell on the paperwork Sarah was reviewing, and according to the documentation, he was delivering specialized cleaning equipment to the palace maintenance department. The work order appeared legitimate, complete with proper authorization codes and supervisor signatures. Mitchell himself seemed nervous, but that wasn't unusual. Many people became anxious when interacting with palace security, even those who had legitimate business. Marcus circled the van slowly, his trained eye searching for anything that might indicate a problem. The vehicle's license plate matched the information on the work order. The company logos on the sides appeared authentic, with the right fonts and colors for the cleaning service that regularly contracted with the palace. Even the minor dents and scratches seemed consistent with a working vehicle that had seen regular use. But the subtle wrongness Marcus had detected continued to nag at him. Years of experience had taught him that security threats rarely announced themselves obviously. Instead, they often hid behind careful preparation and attention to detail that made them appear legitimate to casual observation. The most dangerous adversaries were those who understood security procedures well enough to exploit them. He decided to request permission to inspect the van's contents, a procedure that was within his authority, but not always necessary for routine deliveries from established contractors. Sarah caught his eye and understood immediately that he wanted to conduct a more thorough examination. She began asking Mitchell more detailed questions about his delivery, keeping him engaged while Marcus prepared for the inspection. Mitchell's answers were reasonable and consistent with the paperwork, but Marcus noticed subtle signs of increased anxiety as the questioning continued. The driver's hands gripped the steering wheel more tightly, and he began checking his mirrors more frequently. Behaviors that could indicate nervousness about the van's contents rather than simple discomfort with the security process. Marcus approached the rear of the van and asked Mitchell to unlock the cargo doors. This request was standard procedure for vehicle inspections, and most drivers complied without hesitation. Mitchell fumbled with his keys for a moment, a delay that could have been explained by nervousness. But Marcus made note of it anyway. The moment the rear doors opened, Marcus understood why his instincts had been warning him that something was wrong. Instead of the cleaning equipment described on the work order, the van contained rows of sophisticated electronic devices that he didn't immediately recognize. The equipment was carefully arranged and secured, suggesting professional installation rather than temporary transport. Marcus's training kicked in immediately. Without showing alarm that might trigger a dangerous reaction from Mitchell, he calmly stepped back from the van while subtly signaling Sarah that they had a problem. Years of working together had taught them to communicate through small gestures that wouldn't be noticed by civilians. And Sarah understood instantly that the situation had escalated beyond a routine inspection. The electronic equipment in the van appeared to be recording devices of some kind, though Marcus couldn't immediately determine their specific purpose. Some components looked like high-end cameras, while others resembled the sophisticated listening devices used by intelligence agencies. The entire setup suggested surveillance capability far beyond what any legitimate cleaning service would require. Sarah continued her conversation with Mitchell while discreetly alerting palace security through her radio. Her voice remained calm and professional, asking routine questions about delivery schedules, while simultaneously requesting immediate backup through coded phrases that wouldn't alarm the driver. Marcus maintained his position near the rear of the van, ready to respond if Mitchell attempted to flee or take any aggressive action. Mitchell seemed to realize that his cover story was falling apart. His nervousness increased noticeably, and he began looking around as if assessing escape routes. Marcus recognized the behavior from his training, the moment when a person with hidden motives realizes they've been discovered and begins considering their options for avoiding capture. The backup Marcus and Sarah had requested arrived within minutes, though the additional security personnel positioned themselves discreetly to avoid creating a scene that might alarm palace visitors or staff members. Palace protocol emphasized maintaining normal operations whenever possible, even during security incidents, to avoid disrupting the institution's daily functions. Marcus decided to confront Mitchell directly about the discrepancy between the work order and the van's actual contents. Speaking in the calm but authoritative tone he had perfected over years of security work, he asked Mitchell to explain why surveillance equipment was being delivered instead of the cleaning supplies listed on the documentation. Mitchell's response was a mixture of stumbling explanations and obvious lies. He claimed the equipment belonged to someone else who had borrowed the van, then changed his story to suggest that he had picked up the wrong vehicle from his company's motor pool. Neither explanation was credible, and Marcus could see that Mitchell knew his deceptions weren't convincing anyone. The situation took a more serious turn when Marcus noticed that some of the surveillance equipment appeared to be currently active, with small LED lights indicating that recording was in progress. This discovery suggested that Mitchell wasn't just transporting the devices, he was actually using them to gather intelligence about palace operations, possibly including information about security procedures and personnel. Marcus made the decision that would define the rest of his career. Following protocols for potential espionage situations, he placed Mitchell under citizen's arrest while waiting for police authorities to arrive. The driver didn't resist, perhaps understanding that any aggressive action would only worsen his legal situation, but his compliance couldn't hide the fact that he had been caught in what appeared to be a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation. Sarah began documenting everything about the van and its contents, taking photographs and making detailed notes that would be essential for the investigation that was certain to follow. Palace security maintained strict procedures for handling potential threats, and every aspect of the incident would need to be thoroughly recorded and analyzed. As they waited for police investigators to arrive, Marcus had time to examine the surveillance equipment more carefully. What he discovered made the situation even more troubling than he had initially realized. The devices weren't just capable of recording audio and video, they included specialized equipment for intercepting electronic communications, suggesting capabilities that went far beyond simple surveillance. Some of the equipment appeared to be designed for defeating security systems, including devices that could jam radio communications or interfere with electronic locks.